Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. I'm Eduardo Barca with co-hosts, teacher and socialist Aaron Libson and socialist Kenny Cepeda. We're online at what'sleftpodcast.com. You can find that link to our site in the episode notes. You can also find my personal social media handle as @Don Eduardo Barca on Instagram. And please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications, and share your favorite episode where we found this episode. Thank you. All right. Today's topic, I'll hand it over to Andy. There's been a change, and so please take it away, Andy.
Yeah. So obviously there's a lot of things going on in the world. And generally what's left is, as Eduardo says, challenging the mainstream left. But this Monday, I got some news that my uncle died, Uncle Aaron. And it was quick, and it was a little surprising. I think he's 86. I believe he's 86. So he lived a long life. But I told Eduardo and Kenny, I sent them both an article about him. We have a lot in common, me and my uncle. And I want to talk about him today. I want to make this episode about him, because in many ways, I mean, I think some of these stories I think I'll tell, he has helped me understand that I'm part of a long line of people who have been opposing the system. And it goes beyond just him. It goes to his parents and his parents' parents. And it takes us back to the Ukraine, East Ukraine, the part that's right now is the contested area, where World War III is starting. I love my uncle, and I'm going to miss him. So I wanted to spend some time talking about him. And that's what I want to do today.
Right. Andy, I didn't know you were Ukrainian.
Yeah, I've always in the past, I described myself as Russian and Polish. Polish on my mom's side and Russian on my father's side. But I found out from talking to my uncle that actually they're from Ukraine. And they didn't make much of a distinction. As we know, the language spoken in East Ukraine is Russian. So, and really, the location of that world war, of the proxy war, is really a civil war going on in that region, because these are Slavs fighting Slavs and Russian speaking people fighting Russian speaking people. There's Ukrainian speaking people there as well. But it's that's where I'm from, or no, that's where my grandparents were from. And I'm gonna show some pictures. In fact, can I show the first one here, just to give you here's a picture of, and I think, here we go. I think it's right here. And I believe, okay, one of these two people up here in the top right-hand corner is my grandfather. And I think this right here, this little guy right here, might be my uncle. I might be, but this is my family from Ukraine. And I think one of these women will be Dora, who is the mother of Aaron and my grandmother. And I don't know who that is. It might be her right here in the bottom right-hand corner. And then Herman was my grandfather's. And I actually have the names of these folks. And they're, hold on, let me see. Obviously it was Herman Libson, but it was Dora Konofsky who became Dora Libson, I guess. So
this is on your paternal side?
From my paternal side. Yeah, let me stop sharing. And these, they were all like Bolsheviks. They were and Jews, and they left Ukraine because of pogroms, because of the attacks on Jews and on radicals and on Bolsheviks. And my grandmother, and then my grandmother was a socialist, communist, and and dabbled in community organizing as a communist. I don't know, I shouldn't say dabbled, but she was definitely involved in that. And being a socialist and communist was more common in the 20s and 30s. And my uncle talked a little bit about how they had choirs and things like that, that socialist choirs and socialist this and that. And it was just more built into the fabric of society. There were all sorts of communist newspapers. And then when my uncle grew up, maybe I'll show another picture of him in that era.
And so he wasn't born over there.
No, he was. Well, shit, I don't know.
I mean, just curious.
That's how he was born. It says here, just quickly, let's see. Oh no, he was born and raised in North Philadelphia.
He was in Philadelphia, yeah, born and raised in Philadelphia. So that might not be my uncle. I don't know, but that's my old family on the Libson side. And that little kid may not be Uncle Aaron, but it didn't say in the thing that they sent. But that's the family from which my father and my uncle and also my Aunt Norma came from. And I'm not sure if I've talked about Aunt Norma, although I did. There was an episode in which Aunt Norma had passed, and she was also a radical freedom rider, had spent 40 days in a Mississippi jail as being part of the freedom riders, and stayed very much a radical all the rest of her life, as did my uncle. Although later, maybe he and I would have some differences over the Democratic Party. He was more of a supporter, and I was like, nah. But so we would go back and forth on that. But we definitely were politically aligned. He always said he was very proud of me for being a building representative, a union representative, as he had been, and for staying a communist, as he had, and this was something else that I found about him that I think I sent you guys that I hadn't realized. Let me share the screen again. So this was something I found when I was just doing a kind of a search of him, about him, and it's from the archives that are located in California. In fact, these archives are in Stanford. And if I want to find this stuff, I can actually go to Stanford and look it up. You can't get it online. And I think I'm going to do that. But this is says Subversive Activities Control Board Records in the United States. And if you look here, docket 51 through 100 cites the subversive activities of the Communist Party of the United States of America. And if you go to docket 81, or box 81, you will find, let's see, right here, Francis Gabau and Aaron Libson. And I guess they also wanted to talk to Lionel Libson, my dad. So you can see that here. And so I was very proud of this. Like, glad to see my dad was part of this, but I definitely knew that Uncle Aaron had his, moments of being looked at suspiciously by the government, which, like, that's good. I think everyone should be considered a subversive ultimately. So I was very proud to see that. And I want to go to those archives are in Stanford. I think I want to go down there and you can look at them and just see what were the kind of questions he was dealing with and how did he answer them and things like that. So anyway, this I just meeting my uncle again. I grew up with him. We would visit Philadelphia to visit my grandmother and grandfather, and then we would see my uncle. And we didn't have a very tight family, but the only people that me and my brother and my sister would kind of get along with that I remember were the daughter and son of Uncle Aaron. And I have a picture of them. Here we go again. Do it again. Sorry, I'm going back and forth on this. This is them. So this is my uncle here on the right, Uncle Aaron. This is cousin Ingrid and cousin Johnny. And we would go to their house and spend time with them. And I just remember that being very fun. And we didn't have very extended family, but this felt like an extended family. And we just got along with them. And I was very fond of my uncle. I didn't necessarily think any more of him than any other relative, but I really liked his kids. And so for that reason, I liked my uncle. But I don't think I developed a more special relationship with my uncle until much later in my life. And if you remember in the article about him being a union organizer and a civil rights activist, he mentions a Bay Area trip that he took when he was going to California. And that was in 2004. That was 20 years ago. I was with Susie then, probably the most long-term partner I'd had prior to meeting Brandy. There's somebody in between. But really, then after Susie, there was like a 10 or 15-year stretch where I just am not seeing anyone because I was like confused about what the heck's going on in me. But in seeing Uncle Aaron then and Aunt Norma, she was visiting, I really feel it really kindled family for me. The idea of it was like my downstairs our heat is off because we don't have a pilot light on, and I feel like my family pilot light was off, and I feel like he kind of started it, even if he didn't know it. And I just remember me and Susie visiting him, and he was very warm, and they were very effusive, being proud of us and proud of me, particularly for me being a socialist and a union activist, and it just meant a lot to me to have somebody who in my family who was like not sort of skeptical of it. At that time, my family has much more embraced my views, but at that time they were a little bit like, "What's going on there? Where are you going? What are you doing?" And maybe a little bit more at a distance to what I was doing. And my uncle was not, and so I feel like not only has he been a lifeline, and in many ways, and he would tell me stories about the organizing that my grandparents did and great grandparents did, their struggles in the United States, their struggles in Ukraine, and it just became apparent to me that I was just part of this line of people who consider themselves Bolsheviks, for lack of a better term. And I think some people here will hear communist and Bolshevik, and they will have a negative association with that. But I think people have to understand that people who were calling themselves Bolsheviks and communists were people who were trying to do some of the best things that were done in the world. Like, whether or not they were successful, the individuals who claimed that tradition of communism and Bolshevism, and that's not only them, there are anarchists who do the same and things like that, but people who are part of that tradition were part of a tradition of people who were like, there's something rotten in this world. It is not right the way people are being treated. And they wanted to see a change in that. And I think you might have seen that in the article that I sent you, where my uncle later joins the group. Oh, the National Association of Black and White Men Together. So that was what it was. It started off as he started off in this group called the Black and White Men Together, that later became called Men of All Colors Together. And you heard that. I guess I'm going to read the part that he said, because I thought what he said there. This is an interview in an article written in the Philadelphia Gay News. The title of it is Aaron Libson, Decades of Activism from Civil Rights to Union Rights. And here's what he says about why he started that group. And then I'm going to stop talking and hear from you guys. I think. Let's see, grandparent. So he goes in the late 70s. This is my Aaron Libson talking, my uncle. In the late 70s, in the 1870s, I'd heard about Black and White Men Together on a talk radio program. I wanted to get involved, but I didn't know where they were or anything until I met a connection who put me in touch with them in 1983. And he would have been involved with the group in Philadelphia. And then the interviewer asks, "What made you want to join that particular organization? were you in a biracial relationship? And he says, no. The one thing I didn't like about the gay community was all the discrimination I found. Men against women, white against black, and the class differences. People whose job entailed a suit and tie, not mixing with working class people, etc. I figured black and white men together would be a good chance to work for some equality in the community, because I always felt, how can you be for gay liberation if you're going to discriminate within your own community? I still find that to be one of the biggest contradictions. And I'm just extremely proud of him, like for just being part of something like that. And I remember I would visit him and he would tell me about these trips that he would plan with his group. I went to one of his meetings and met some of his comrades in the group as well. And he really liked that. And liked the fact that whether I was gay or not, that I wanted to go to these meetings and meet his fellow comrades in arms about fighting for justice within the gay community and even outside of the gay community. So I don't know. He did a lot of things, and a lot of things that I would want to do, or rather that I try to do in my own areas. You know, like he has his areas that really meant something to him, and like for me, one of those issues would be like something like immigration. And to speak, I'm very passionate about that. I don't know if that's something that animated Uncle Aaron as much, but we each had our areas that we're passionate about. Obviously, education for me, and just revolution. And he and I both were passionate about revolution. Although at the end of the day, I think we started to differ about what that might look like. Him thinking there was a Democratic Party road, and me going like, no way that was true. But that didn't. We would just disagree about that, but we didn't have any major arguments. I don't think we had any major arguments until COVID came, and then there were some issues there. Anyway, I feel like I've talked long.
What do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean
well, yeah, I mean, I think he was more like, we've seen. He knew that I was, you know, he followed some of the episodes of What's Left. He knew that I was critical of the narrative. And he also started to, you know, he knew that I was taking positions at my school and prepared to like lose my job, and I was fighting against this lockdown narrative and the things done by the state in terms of vaccination and vax mandates and PCR tests and masks and things like that. And I think my uncle just felt, no, these needed to be done for safety. And we had, I remember we had one kind of bitter argument over more than I'd ever had with him over the phone, because I was very defensive and because I'm trying to fight for my rights in my struggle. And I just think the fact that we diverged so sharply, that led to a bit of a break, you know. I mean, one of the pictures you're going to see, and maybe I'll show you guys later, and you guys saw it, is the picture of me and my uncle together. That was in 2019. And by 2020, you know, we're kind of arguing over COVID, or over the lockdowns and the government measures. And, you know, that's why I kind of do like finding like this tradition where he himself was hounded by the state. I know that it really helps me feel like I did the right thing, because I feel like if you're doing what the state is telling you to do, you're probably doing the wrong thing. And if you're being called a subversive by the state, then you're probably closer to the right path. And so that's the path I took. And I think maybe, you know, my uncle didn't necessarily see it that way. We didn't talk as much after that. But I'm grateful for this. His daughter, Ingrid, called me or texted me like that weekend, the weekend before he died, saying, hey, he's in the hospital. Do you want to reach out to him? And I said, yes, I do want to reach out to him, because it's been a while since we talked. And I tried to reach him on Sunday morning, and I had to leave a message. I eventually got a hold of him at Sunday, like 3 or 4 o'clock my time, would have been 6 o'clock his time. And I got to talk to him about 7 or 8 minutes. And I thank God that I got a chance to just tell him I love him, because I do. And I got to hear from him to say, I love you too, which I know he does. And then Ingrid was contacting us, showing us a picture on Monday morning, basically making it look like, and she thought, with all reason, he was getting better, vitals getting better, things like that. And then that evening, Monday evening, he passed, like, very suddenly, you know. I will say that if I knew he was going to pass, I definitely had more to say in terms of how grateful I am for him giving me confidence despite these differences over COVID. And I wouldn't have mentioned that anyway, but his example and him reaching out to me and saying he's proud of me gave me confidence about going down this road. And he is the reason, he is a part of that reason how I've built a family today and been more connected to my biological family. How I just feel like I'm growing an ever widening family of non-biological people, you know, Brandy and Kenny and Eduardo and Emma and Jennifer and Brian and, you know, Jessica and Jake, you know, like, I mean, I don't see Jessica and Jake all that often. I hope to see Jake again, but I don't care. Like, I feel like, for me, I feel like they're family. And uh, and Uncle Aaron, just, family was very important to him in the same way it is to Emma, in the same way that she pushed me on that. And he also was one of the reasons that I gotten back in touch with my dad, which ultimately didn't work out, but I'm glad I got in touch with my dad because I got to say some important things to him. And ultimately, my Uncle Aaron was my surrogate father. He was he wasn't Lionel Libson, he was Aaron Libson. And he shared my initials, he shared my politics in many ways. We were born on the same day, July 18th, and we would call each other on July 18th and basically wish each other happy birthday. So this guy was huge, you know, and I'm just glad that I got a chance to say goodbye. Or rather, I got a chance to tell him I love him, which for me is pretty close to goodbye. But I knew that once Ingrid had told me that I had to call him and tell him that. But I was kind of planning on moving a little more slowly to kind of work through some of our issues.
Always, sometimes some things get rushed forward in life.
Yeah. Yeah.
We don't have control over that.
Yeah, and they're going to have his funeral is today, like right now. But they're going to have a celebration of his life sometime over the summer. I hope I can make that. I'll want to speak. I'm hoping I can talk to Ingrid and people who were part of his family and tell him how special he was, and get a little bit more information. And I don't know, just be there. I'm not going to get information. Just be there and be part of celebrating his life and sharing what I know of him. So.
Well, you also have to say that looking at the picture, you look very similar to physically. Like you know, I can see where you come from.
Here we go. I'll show that picture then, right here, because it's going to be. I'm going to do a little montage in the beginning of this episode, but oh no, that's not it. Oh, wow. This is the picture you're talking about. There's that guy. That's my Uncle Aaron. But this is the picture you're talking about, right? We do look similar.
You're a younger version, of course, but
You have the
look
same.
exactly similar because of age. But obviously, the facial structure and the area of the bridge, the nose, and shape,
and deep set eyes. I do think that's like a Slavic thing.
Yeah. You think so?
I think so. I think so.
Yeah.
Did your uncle speak Russian or have like some?
I don't think he spoke Russian. I wonder if he knew some Polish, because he was part of a Polish dancing crew. And I'm going to put that picture up here now, folks. Yeah, there he is. Janosik or something. And let's see. It's got to be him right there, right? So he did folk dancing, Polish folk dancing. So in addition to just a bunch of other stuff. So very active guy.
This is your father's brother.
Yeah, and Norma was the oldest of the family. Mm-hmm. My biological father, whose name is Lionel, would have been the middle child, and Aaron would have been the youngest. Ironically, like that's literally the same pattern. I have an older sister, I'm the middle male, and then we have a younger boy. So that pattern has been repeated from that Libson family to our Libson family. Oldest girl, middle male, youngest male. And I would be like my dad, and my brother Joe would be like Aaron.
Yeah. We've met your sister. We had the same table at your sister's.
Yeah. Yeah.
She's very kind.
She is. She is. No one would describe Norma as very kind, although Norma is kind. But Norma, my sister, is very kind, and Norma, I think in deep down is very kind, but people would run into her and she's a little caustic and can be very biting, so she was the woman. So people ask me if I ever smoked cigarettes. The only time I smoked a cigarette was with my aunt when I was 5 years old, because she would smoke all the time, and I got curious about it, and she said, well, you can try it. And so I tried a cigarette, and nothing happened, because all I ever saw was smoke blowing out. So I just kept blowing on the cigarette and going like, this is dumb. And I still remember that experience, and I've never smoked a cigarette after that.
So I have a question about, so, you said that, immigration is an important issue to you, and your uncle had like other, like things of interest, not necessarily that he didn't care, but
right.
Did you talk about immigration with him, and like what maybe some of his thoughts on what was happening?
I don't remember actually talking too much to him about that, to be honest. I might have, but I don't remember. And I certainly don't want to say anything that might misrepresent him. So I don't remember if so I don't know if he was like open borders, or if he was like, well, people should have a pathway, which I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. I agree, just open, like borders should be brought down. Who cares about those things? But I don't think we've ever had a conversation about that.
So what stuff did you talk about? So you mentioned like, being in like a union rep, right? Like that stuff. And like, so would you consult him on like issues that you were going through?
I don't know if I consulted, but I shared some of my experiences, and he had similar experiences he was a machinist. I never really knew what that was. I know he worked for different companies, but I think he was just operating some sort of tool to cut holes or cut metal or whatever. And I think the biggest thing is we just would talk about kind of what bosses were like, what managers were like. Kind of, we shared at that point a desire of supporting unions, but realizing that they didn't go far enough, and that there was the people on the ground who, because he had never got an elected position. He was elected as a building rep, which I do think is probably the most you'd ever want to do. I don't think you'd want to get into office as a union position. I think you just become a shill then. And we would just talk about some of those things, and like the difficulties of that, the stress of it, the demands of people feeling like, help me, where at the same time we're trying to like build a bigger struggle. So I think we shared things about that. We talked about war. We talked about capitalism. We talked about communism, and maybe where we differed on the idea of like, I think he saw a slower road, maybe more gentle road that we might take that had an electoral thing, and I just didn't agree with that. And so we would go back and forth on that. And then, I think I remember talking about Republicans and Democrats. Even then, he would say, he leaned more towards the Democrats, and I would say I don't lean towards any of those. And I was already starting to kind of think of myself as having an audience in both the Republican and Democratic camps. But a lot of it was just hearing stories about the family. And at one point, I was thinking to record it because I have such a bad memory. I can't remember all the different stories he told me about my family growing up. And the biggest thing I really came away with from talking to him was just how destroyed the left tradition, the communist tradition that exists in this country had been, because it was really clear to me the way he described the way communism and Marxism was kind of much more embedded in people's lives back in the 20s and 30s. It's not even like it was in the 60s. It 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 was just normal, and it was normal to read communist newspapers. It was normal to to talk about Marxism as an alternative to capitalism, and socialism as well. And it's not that everyone was at one level, almost everyone was a revolutionary, and at the same time, I don't think people necessarily grasped how deep the changes that they were talking about were going to have to be. But it was just more like it seemed like more in the air that people breathed, that you could claim communism as some sort of political touchstone, whereas now it's it's really been pushed to the side. And even in the freedom movement, the authoritarian thing is actually being considered by some a communist plot against it. It does not help that so many so-called socialists and communists went for the lockdown measures. Like, that hurts. Like, that makes it reasonable that people would say that, because but from the tradition that I feel like I'm in and that my uncle came from, people were trying to make a better world. And people were looking to help one another. He talked about how my grandmother was trying to do that. And the one big through line, and this is why I love that thing that my uncle was talking about in terms of not of trying to overcome the divides within the gay community, is, and this is what I'm passionate about around immigration, is it feels like such a divide that makes it impossible for us to make change. And so, in the same way that my uncle was feeling like there could be no gay liberation if you didn't overcome the divides between men and women and black and white, I feel the same way. If we don't if we can't overcome these divisions between people who are U.S. citizens and people who are outside the United States, and we're allowed to think of ourselves as enemies, whereas people the people who are outside the border have to be kept away by this government, then, like my uncle, I feel like we're doomed unless we change that.
I feel that, your uncle, like, from what you're describing, represented that bridge, right, of like the people who still have that sense of like the more tangible presence of communism instead of the theoretical, fashionable thing that we have today, right? Like, and that is not really practiced by and large, like, because there's so many people who claim Marxism, right? But like you were showing us a picture of your family, and like, saying like that was their life, like, like it was part of embedded with their life, versus now, like, I feel that you can find Marxism, communism in academia, and it's
Right.
filtered through those lenses,
Yep.
right? And and so, yeah, I mean, that's why it's obviously you lost a family member, but a camera too, who was that link, right? Like, and like, you still, right? Like, you're describing it, but he was closer to that, right? To that time. And I
Exactly.
think that the more time passes, that connection is severed even more.
I agree. Yeah, I feel it. I do feel it. I feel like his passing is symbolic of that period in U.S. working class history becoming more and more into the past. Um, Now we will have to do better than they did, and we will have to do better than we did. But there was something very communal and very oppositional to the powers that be that existed there that isn't nearly as manifest today in the working class. And that's a problem for our side, I believe.
And I was struck by you know in the USA how there was still a lot of homophobia going on, and he was affected by it and wasn't able to. I think people should read the article that you shared with us if people want, so people know what I'm talking about.
Do you want to share the story? Because I think it's an important story, and I'll add some other things to it.
Yeah. Let's see. I'll share my screen. I was just struck by this because he was such a young man. Was such a young man, And I'm going to read this because I think I think people should come back to this. So it says here, when did you come out? And when I said, when did you come out? Like where? Come out of prison? And then I'm looking here. It's Philadelphia Gay News. Of course. I just made that connection just today. But when I read through, I was like, come out. And then I'm like, why are they talking about his private life? Which So, but anyhow, so I don't know why I made that connection today. So here it says, when did you come out? It says here. And it says, I got straight married when I was 23 and had 2 children. Straight married. Then in 1966, I was arrested in a tea room in Hunting Park. I didn't do any time behind it, but it completely changed my life. The ordinance I was charged with has since been taken off the books, but at the time I was charged and tried. Then the interviewer asks, what tea room? Like, what's that? Your uncle says, a public bathroom in the park. Somebody told me about it, and every so often I'd stop by to see what was happening. Obviously, you didn't have the access. People don't have access, to go meet somebody or to figure yourself out in a safe space to see what's happening, right? And since I was still married, it was on the QT. What's the QT? That's the thing
on the down low, kind of like.
I suppose so. I suppose on the QT. Quiet time, I thought, but QT. But when I got arrested, my wife found out. It's been tough. We stayed married for about 5 years after that before we got a divorce. We shared custody, and I always remained, and this is the part I loved, I always remained an active parent with my children.
You did. Yep.
And the interview says, that must have been traumatic. He says, yes, the police had a park guard office. They took me to and kept me overnight. I knew that if it became public, that it wouldn't be able to face anyone. Family, friends, co-workers. I made a vow to myself, this is so heartbreaking, that I would take my life if anyone found out. And there was another component. The interview asked, which was, and your uncle, forgive me, I should say your uncle's name, I should say Aaron Libson. And it says here, which was, Aaron Libson said, in my activism as a young person, I joined the Communist Party. And so there was so much going on at the time, the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, and so forth. And I found myself, like a lot of us, joining the party. A year later, when I had the arrest, I pleaded nolo contendere. I do not wish to contend. On a Friday. The next day, Saturday, I woke up and got ready for work. And as I looked at the paper that morning, there was a small article saying, local red arrested. I had a suicide plan ready just in case it came out. So I thought, okay, this is it. And I carried out the plan. Oh, God. And the interview says, thank you, you weren't successful. Aaron Libson says, I wasn't going to do anything at my house where my family would find me, so I rented a room at the Arch Street YMCA. I packed some of the crystal stuff you clean toilets with in some tinfoil, goodness, and I swallowed that and laid down and waited for something to happen. Nothing happened. In the interim, I called a friend of mine. I was waiting for something to happen with the poison. I got up and sat on the window ledge. The room was on the 5th floor. As I realized the poison wasn't working, I looked down and thought, maybe I should just lean forward and let's go. Before I could do anything, my friend showed up knocking on the door. It saved my life. He called some people, including a lawyer, called my job, and talked to them. They said they had no problems with me coming back to work despite the arrest. From then on, I became known as the Gay Red. And people came to respect me to the point that I was elected union shop steward and then chief. And that's, the work he did, the union work. People accepted me for who I was and how I presented myself. When the factory eventually closed down, it was on a Saturday, and that Monday I had a new job, so I was always just anyhow. I moved because I consider myself to be part of the gay community, even though I've said on this show, and people know, and exes of mine know, I've been with women as well, but I mostly consider myself to be like aligning with myself with the community, even though I have differences because a lot of them happen to be liberal and left-leaning and all kind of on the Democrat side. And I have a lot of there's a lot of infighting. Sometimes I've had a hard time finding my identity within this community. Right. So, it's just challenging. I hadn't I don't I have thought of other traumatic experiences that have made me question my life and things like that. But I don't know if my identity as someone who has a relationship with same sex or outside of that doesn't really define me. That's not my strongest identity. I think of being Mexican, being Latino, and more other political issues tend to be my focus more than gay rights or anything like that. But it must have been tough at that time. And, people did get married and there were a lot of broken marriages. And I don't think people did it intentionally to hurt their loved ones or their spouses. It was not, you didn't have safe spaces or a lot of places to come out. And I could just, I don't know what that's like. I have a different point of view in the generation I'm from, but it's always helpful to look back at some of the time and to have that layer, communist and be involved in his community as a gay man. It does, Gay Red. I think you couldn't be any more prouder than that, so
yeah.
I was moved by that.
And one detail to share is the Communist Party did not support him in his homosexuality. They were critical. They looked at it like a bourgeois deviation. And I actually think he was excluded, if not kicked out, for this ultimately by the Communist Party for this. That made Norma very upset, and she quit the Communist Party on the basis of that, to her credit. But that was, and I say this because I understand how people have concerns about the way the transgender initiative is being used by the ruling class. But we have to make a distinction between how a cause is used by the ruling class and the experience of oppressed people. I believe transgender people are oppressed in the same way that gays were oppressed. And when people fighting oppression are against those people who are who do like the Communist Party did to my uncle, you can't make any headway. You're going to fall short some way. And so I think we can be opposed to how transgender cause is being utilized by the ruling class, but I think we have to be in alignment with people who are trying to figure themselves out in terms of their gender. I don't know if Jessica would agree with us on this, but that is my uncle's experience and what the mistakes the Communist Party make that hurt people like him. they stick with me, as I don't want to make that same mistake.
This part of, after he went through his incident, right, attempted suicide, and then being elected for building rep, is that what happened?
Yep.
And that to me is what, working class stuff is about, because forget the Communist Party, right, like the organization, forget the union fucking reps who, fucking sell out all of the goddamn time. This is the workers, right, co-workers who knew him, and despite, and like this is what in Philadelphia,
Yeah.
what I assume is a pretty conservative time.
Yeah.
They're already kind of conservative, especially at that time.
Yeah.
But they knew him as a leader, right? Like, and as a person who showed up, right? Like that's what I believe that must have happened, because, right, like they knew him or he stood for, and that shit, that this mirroring didn't mean shit, and the fucking Communist Party bullshit didn't mean shit. That's what, and so that's what's like the silver lining, I guess, if you can say that. It's beautiful, right? And this is what I think that, potentially a movement should look like, right? Like the people that and what they stand for, and you'll see what matters, not like the bullshit that you're being told, right? By like these institutions that, you know, and it's just that part really warmed my heart, like, and gives me hope, and what I believe to be true, right? Like that, at the end of the day, all these fucking bullshit identities is not what really defines you, right? Like you were saying, Eduardo, and yet we live in a moment in history where the supposed freedom fighters, are like completely engulfed in this language and this fascination, and forgetting the real shit that matters is like electing someone like your uncle, who, to do the fighting against the fucking union, against the bosses, and stuff. So, that was a highlight for me of this article.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I do have a question about this, actually. With regards to like your family, was this talked about openly? Like, did you know about this story?
I remember I remember being in Cincinnati, being young, and hearing, oh, my uncle was caught doing something bad. And I do remember we didn't talk much about him after that. And there was, so if you asked me, I think our family fell into a little bit of that shame, being ashamed of him. And that's why it was such a big deal to see him in 2004. I probably had not seen him since that scandal. I don't think, because like I remember playing with Johnny and Ingrid. I don't think I ever. No, I would have. I must have, because 1966 is when I was born, right? And that happened. Did it happen in 66? Yeah. So I did go see them, but I somehow remember hearing that there's that thing. So that's not adding up, because I clearly was with Johnny and Ingrid later, after I was born. But I do think it marked him in the family a bit. That's my impression. And I didn't get to talk to him about it until not after 2004, but when I visited him in Philadelphia. Then he told me the story about trying to commit suicide, and it was harrowing to hear. It was like really scary. I mean, he tried. He really tried to kill himself, and he just didn't know how to do it, and thought that if he ate enough poison that it should do it, and it didn't. And then I don't know who that guy who he talked to was, but thank God that person did something, because I think he would have pushed himself off that ledge eventually. And like you said, Kenny, it's so unfortunate, right? Like right around the corner were people prepared to accept him that he did not know. And yet he did experience some shaming, certainly from the Communist Party, and there might have been others, but there was a set of people who were just like, we don't care. You're the gay redneck.
Exactly. Let's see. I think we've discussed your differences and your similarities. We've discussed personal lives, challenges, as well as the important work he did as a union worker. And I guess I'm looking for, for a way to. How would you like to conclude, Andy?
I guess what I'm feeling right now is first of all, I'm Kenny and Eduardo. I'm very grateful for you being at this, for willing to shift over to this. Jessica, I sent the article to Jessica and to Hema. Hema called me to pay respects. Jessica sent that nice message. I'm very conscious of loving you guys right now, like you, Kenny, and you, Eduardo, and just feeling very connected to you both, and to even to our broader What's Left family. And that's just, I feel like my uncle is the kind of person who would have wanted me to be that way. And I'm very grateful that he took me under his wing, that he embraced me and made me a nicer person, like a person who is capable of building relationships and sharing myself, and we're not just good to people, but we give of ourselves and are vulnerable. My uncle was very vulnerable, could be very vulnerable. He could be very private, but he could be vulnerable. And I'm just very grateful for the people I have in my life. So that's what I'm conscious of. I think in many ways, me telling you both that right now is the best way to honor and celebrate my uncle, because he was about family. He was about love. And there's more I will say when I go to that celebration, if I can make it there, because there is more to be thankful of for him. I'm just very grateful, and I'm just glad I can have this episode to honor him, and to speak of my part in my family's history. He helped make me proud to be a Libson, which I didn't necessarily feel that way from my dad. I had mixed feelings about him, anger at my dad at times for much of my life. And with my uncle, no, I feel like I'm part of that legacy that I'm proud of. And that's nice to be part of. In the way that I hear you, Kenny, talking about your mom and the work she did with the prostitutes and things like that, and the work she does in the SEIU. And Eduardo, I don't know if I've heard that similar thing from you. I'll leave that out, but I've definitely heard that from you, Kenny, in terms of your family. And that's a good feeling to have, when you can feel connected to a line, and that it lines not just with feeling they're accepting you, but the very thing that you're committing your life to is something that they've committed themselves to as well, and you're part of that. And that's like, fuck yeah, I'm glad to be part of that. So I'm thank you, Uncle Aaron.
That's very heartwarming. Thank you for sharing that with us, especially since you think about life and appreciation of life and who you've got in your family and your community. I think it's very important.
Yeah.
I think it was a good topic to discuss, especially today being the funeral of your uncle, and here we are commemorating his life on What's Left, and we get a chance to get to know a bit of your family and your uncle. I appreciate and thank you for that, and for giving us a chance to do that.
Definitely recommend people to read that interview, because it's definitely the life of someone exceptional, and that's I was honored to read it, and thank you for bringing it up and also sharing that, because it gives me more context in understanding your journey too. Like of that time period, 2004. Because I graduated high school in 2005.
Right.
And like we started, that's when we kind of post high school, right? Like,
yep.
And I've seen your journey in terms of your struggle with your, sorting through, your life.
Yeah.
And it's definitely sheds a new light and shines a new light into that period of your life, and how much you traveled, and in turn influenced me. So thank you to your uncle, and like allow me to witness that your journey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have the same initials.
That's true. That's very true. Aaron Libson and Andrew Libson. Well, yeah, go ahead and post this as soon as you can, Andy. It'd be very good for people to have a chance to look into it, and also give them a glimpse of your life and your family's life and how you've been also influenced and shaped.
Yeah. Well, again, and thank you guys for doing this, embracing it, bringing out these things, saying these wonderful things. So I feel like we had our little mini funeral over here for Uncle Aaron, and I appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right, Eduardo, maybe take us home here.
All right. Yes. Oh, let's see. All right. Well, that does it for this week's episode. What's Left is a weekly political podcast / channel challenging the mainstream left. We post information about our topics and our guests on the episode notes where we found this episode, or on our blog, whatsleftpodcast.com. You can find past episodes to this podcast / channel there and connect with us. I remind folks, if you like anything you've heard here, please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications to any of our platforms on Spotify, iTunes Podcast, Bitchute, Odysee, YouTube, Rumble, or Telegram. You can find our blog and any of those links in the episode notes where we found this episode. If you would like to give us feedback about something you've heard or suggest something for us to cover, contact us through our blog. And I'm Eduardo Barca, co-host Kenny Cepeda and Andy Libson, and we hope you check us out next week. Thank you. Ciao.